Hello, friends, and welcome to episode 806 of the Juicebox Podcast. What we have here is a bit of a Christmas miracle, it seems. On December 8th, 2022, just yesterday, the FDA announced approval for the Dexcom G7. And so, of course, I have Jake Leach here today to tell you all about it. Jake is the Chief Operating Officer at Dexcom, but more importantly, he's worked there for nearly 20 years, and his understanding of all things Dexcom is fascinating. I mentioned at the end of the episode when Jake and I finished talking, but I'm throwing questions at him from like accuracy, when's it going to be available? How did you make this? What do you plan on doing about that? And Jake he just has the answers. Absolutely fantastic. It's a great conversation. It's only 30 minutes long, but it's a ton of questions that came right from you, the listeners, a few of my own, and all of Jake's answers. So settle in and enjoy. While you're listening, please remember that nothing you hear on the Juicebox Podcast should be considered advice, medical or otherwise. Always consult a physician before making any changes to your healthcare plan. If you're new to the podcast and you don't know anything about it, you should hit subscribe in your favorite audio app. Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, wherever you get your shows. Follow or subscribe. The Juicebox Podcast puts up new content 4 times a week, Monday through Thursday. You'll hear interviews with an adult living with type 1 or a parent of a child who has type 1, and we talk about all kinds of stuff. For instance, there's an entire series of After Dark episodes where we talk about topics that most people don't talk about. There's Ask Scott and Jenny, where I and Jenny Smith, a CDE who has had type 1 diabetes for 34 years, answer your questions. We have entire episodes about algorithm pumping, Omnipod 5, Control IQ, and looping. There's the Bold Beginning series for people who are just starting out with type 1 diabetes. And all of the questions and topics were suggested by listeners of the show when they were asked, what do you wish you would have known in the beginning? There's the Defining Diabetes series, which is just every conceivable phrase and term that you'll use with type 1 explained in short, fun, understandable episodes. We define thyroid issues in the Defining Thyroid series. Talk about the different variables that impact your blood sugars and life in the Diabetes Variables series. There's an entire mental wellness series, and heard about it, I wouldn't be surprised, the Diabetes Pro Tips series from the Juicebox Podcast. I could explain to you what it is, but instead, I'll read you this, and then we'll get to Jake and the Dexcom G7 excitement. This is from a listener. My son was diagnosed type 1 about 5 months ago. I have learned so much from just the Pro Tip shows, and I will be listening to all of the episodes. This podcast is amazing, both for the information and for the shared experiences from Scott and his guests. They make you feel less like you just got hit in the face with a shovel, and more like you can find a way to keep your loved ones happy and healthy. Check out the Diabetes Pro Tip series at juiceboxpodcast.com. Go to the top in the menu where all of the series I mentioned and much more are listed. Or you can go right into your audio app and search Juicebox Podcast Pro Tip, and they should all pop up right in front of you. The first Pro Tip series is at episode 210. It's called Newly Diagnosed or Starting Over. Yesterday, I woke up to an email about G7 being approved by the FDA. It's a number of months, if I'm being fair. It's a lot of months since it was approved in Europe. That surprised me. Did it surprise you?
Yeah, it did. Yeah, we anticipated those 2 review cycles to be similar in time. And so our goal was to launch the product globally around the same time. But the approval in Europe came as expected, and the FDA approval took a little longer than we anticipated. So it did. Yeah, it very happy to have it now. Very excited to get the product in users' hands now. But it did take a little longer than expected.
Okay. Can you tell me why? Like, what was
the primary reason was we had a feature in there called Silence All that we had to remove. It's in the product that's outside the US, but we had to remove it from the US product. It's basically a feature that allows users to silence the alerts for up to 6 hours. So that if they're in a situation where they understand, they basically, I got it, I don't need to be alerted by my CGM at this point in time. My glucose is gonna be high for a while, or I know that it's low. Really just silence those audio alerts. The FDA wanted to see a little bit more information before they got comfortable with that. So we basically had to take that out of the product for the US for now. We intend to put it back in very quickly here, working with the FDA. But that was the reason why the review took a little longer, because we had to actually make that change and then respond to the FDA with the changes.
Wow. It's interesting that it's making a change, responding to all the backroom stuff takes that many months to get accomplished. It's really crazy. All right. So why do you like that feature? Why did you want to add it?
So it's a highly requested feature by users because while they love their alerts and alarms for glucose and the other aspects of the product, they when they understand that their glucose is out of range, they don't always need to be reminded every 30 minutes. And so with some of particularly the low alerts, it'll continually remind you, even if you acknowledge it. You can only acknowledge it, and it'll come back in 30 minutes.
Okay.
So that is the primary reason. It's really strong user request, and so we're getting very good feedback about the feature outside the US, and like I said, we intend to bring it as soon as we can.
Okay. I'm going to ask you, to be fair to you, if there's anything you want to say before I hit you with a deluge of questions that people gave me to ask you. Do you have anything?
Just, I'm happy to answer all the questions, but just wanted to share in the excitement of the community and everyone who we now have G7 approved. We're working very quickly to get it out at early 2023, and when I say early, it means quite early. We on the heels of Medicare, the CMS recommendation for coverage for folks on basal insulin, so not just intensive insulin anymore. So really a lot of expanded coverage for use of CGM. On top of that, you see the G7 approval. So could be a more exciting time for Dexcom and for the community in general.
Is the Medicare distinction a first step to private insurance accepting those ideas?
Yeah, absolutely. Usually Medicare leads, and then private insurance generally follows quite quickly after that. And so it's expansion of CGM to many people who could benefit from it who weren't previously covered. And
is that an early step towards getting type 2s covered?
Yeah, so that basal coverage is type 2. Most folks on basal insulin are type 2, as well as anybody with type 2 that has hypoglycemia challenges. That's also a part of the recommendation from CMS to Medicare. So and then there's still, as you mentioned, there's still a group of type 2 individuals who would not be covered by Medicare, but that's our next focus. We want to focus on how do we get coverage, because we know CGM has clinical benefit in that population. And so basically generating the evidence that's required to show that to payers.
In my mind, getting it onto type 2s without forcing them to get into a situation where they have to use insulin makes a lot of health sense to me.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Totally.
Do you think we're years from that?
Nothing ever goes as fast as I want it to go. So, I think there's a lot of folks are, CGM, it's continuing to expand, and there's a lot of folks working through, glucose programs. The level 2 program at United is an example of, an insurer basically taking CGM and using it strategically in their type 2 population to generate better outcomes. And so there's going to be a lot more to come over the coming years here.
It's exciting. I've been interviewing a lot of type 2s lately, and all of their successes seem to come from when they start to think about their type 2 diabetes like type 1 diabetes, and they start using insulin in targeted ways, and they have all these great improvements afterwards. So anyway, that's way off the track for a conversation where I only have you for 30 minutes. But we'll ask the big questions that I imagine everybody wants to know, right? When early 2023, that's great. Will it be like a wide rollout, or is it going to be one of those things where, like 3 guys at Tesla are driving the car and nobody else has one?
It is a great question because, We we often do limited launches to make sure we're comfortable with everything, the support of the product itself. But we've had the opportunity to do that overseas in Europe. So we did a limited launch there, and then we moved into full launch. And so our US launch will be full launch. We don't intend to constrain it. We feel comfortable with the amount of product we have, as well as the timing. So it's basically going to early 2023. It's going to be generally available.
Do you think it will create more initial customer service needs, or do you think that the ease of use might actually take back your need for CSR coverage?
What we're seeing with a G7 OUS is that it definitely has resolved a number of the things that we experienced with the G6 launch that needed support. Mm-hmm. Any new product generally requires some level of new education, and so we're ready for we have the support. This is the 7th time we've done a product launch. Each one's bigger, but we learn every time we do it, and so we learned quite a bit from our G6 launch about the expectation of customers and the support needed, and so we'll be ready for it. We've been handling the European launch quite well, and so we'll be ready for US.
All right. Will G6 transmitters continue to be made? And is there a timeline for that not to happen, or?
We basically we'll continue to supply. We got plenty of capacity for G6. We'll continue to supply that product until everyone has transitioned over to G7. The folks that'll kind of some of the AID customers that we're waiting for compatibility with G7. Those folks will definitely. We'll have sensors and G6 transmitters as needed for that entire group until everybody shifts over. We do intend to roll out G7 faster than we did G6 globally in terms of kind of upgrading everyone up to the G7 product, and so but we'll continue to make G6 as long as we need.
Sometimes I notice when I ask people, hey, if you have questions for Jake, put them here. Sometimes I notice you see their fears in the questions. And some of the questions, I think, if they weren't afraid, they wouldn't ask. But this is one that I think I'd like to cover anyway. I know the answer, and I have no idea what the answer is. But a person asks, every time I change my G6 transmitter right now, I kind of have to go into my pump and tell it I've put on a new transmitter. And now they're hearing that the G7, every device they put on, it basically does its own transmission. And they're worried they're going to have to go into the pump. But that's going to be automated, I imagine.
So there's a couple things there. So we'll start with the pump. So one of the things advancements with G7 is there's a 4-digit pairing code, and it's just numeric. It's not alphanumeric. So there's only 4 numbers that identify the transmitter you're trying to pair with. And so there's some sophisticated analytics under the hood there that allow us to do that because clearly the identification number for the transmitter is quite a bit more than just 4 digits, but the pairing code is 4 digits. So with a pump, you do have to enter in the 4 digits, but because that's a more frequent process, it'll be more easily accessible. On the mobile phones, the actual applicator has a QR on it that you can just quickly take a picture, and it loads all that information into the display device.
So the process is sort of it happens quickly during it, but it's not some great thing where I'm scrolling through screens and that kind of thing.
No, it's designed. It's something that you have to do it, but it's very simple, and that's why we made the pairing code. We reduced it so that it would be even simpler for users.
Cool. Will people still be able to calibrate a G7 if they want to?
Of course. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that feature's still there if you want to use it.
Is the adhesive on G7 the same as the adhesive on G6?
No, it's different. If you look at the patch, it may look very similar from the surface, but it's actually a new adhesive that is we've seen in our early clinical studies as well as early performance outside the US that there's less irritation with the sensor patch. For those, it's a small group of folks, but there are folks that do have, patch irritation issues. And so we've seen a reduction in the number of that in the occurrence rate.
Is there any chance that this is the time you're going to tell me that it's going to work directly to an Apple Watch?
Not right out the gate, Scott, but It's not far off. We built it into the hardware. We finally have capability to have that directly in the G7 hardware, and so it's going to be an app release that unlocks that feature.
This makes me remember. You might have context for this. When I was young, Kevin Smith, the film director, was like blowing up, and he used to have these little private film festivals. And every year I'd go to one that he would hold, and there was you'd say hello when you get there, and you start to know them after year. People recognize each other. And the last time I ever went to one, I shook his hand and I said, "Will you tell me when I'm too old to come to these?" And he said, "If you tell me when I'm too old to make these movies." And I just had that feeling in my head, like you and I are like, you're on the edge of retirement. I've been making a podcast for 20 years. And I'm like, is it going to work with the Apple Watch? I don't know why that popped into my head or why I wasted time with it, but it delighted me just now when I was thinking about it. All right. So it's built into the architecture at this point.
Yes, absolutely. Okay. Yeah, the Bluetooth architecture has been updated to include it.
Do you expect it to happen with the G7?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. What's happening to the apps right now? We're going to get a new, a G7 user is going to get a new app, but will the followers, what all is going to happen there?
Yeah. So the G7 plugs seamlessly into the architecture. So for example, when the user basically upgrades from G6 to G7, they actually use their same G6 username and password. They enter that into the G7, and all their data is still in their Clarity, still links in. So now G7 is just updating their data. It also moves over their settings. So similar to when you enter your username and password into a new G6 app, it remembers your previous settings. G7 does the same thing. So it makes it easy for customers to transition over. And then the followers, Clarity app, all of that, just they work. You don't have to get a new one. It works with G7.
Will you be updating the follow app?
We will. So over the past couple of years, we've been kind of laser focused on rolling out G7, basically getting it ready for global launch, as well as our Dexcom ONE product. So both of those are on this completely new software platform. So we've been spending a lot of time. Our teams have been focused on that. But as we've been rolling out Dexcom ONE. G7 is now got our US launch coming and a few more rollouts globally through the 2023 and early 2024. The team's we're going to be able to focus a bunch of the resources on continued innovation in both the follow space, Clarity, as well as the G7 and Dexcom ONE app. So bringing more features to those. So you'll be seeing a more rapid cadence. We've built a lot of software capacities, basically the capacity to develop software to be able to do both Dexcom ONE and G7 at the same time, and across the globe. So we've got a lot of capacity we can unleash on new features.
Give those people something new to do. So at launch, no delta, no rate of change?
No rate of change at launch, not yet.
Okay.
Not yet. But it's on the list.
On the list for the new app.
Yep.
Okay. Android as well, right? Android, iPhone? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Where do you... This kind of gets away from G7 for a second, but it doesn't really. Open access for things like looping, sugar pixel, glucose, stuff like that. Is that, you guys staying the course on how you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, we've always thought about it in terms of we want to have as much accessibility as we can. And so that's the reason why we have our APIs. It's the way we do our partnerships. So I think it's, we've always kind of embraced the community, the innovation in the community, and all of the great stuff that's being done there. And so, we walk a fine line between, regulated devices and making sure that users get access to their data. So our philosophy there hasn't changed. So while new systems do, things change with new systems in all kinds of different aspects, and so there'll be work to do for compatibility for anything, but we definitely, understand how important some of those systems are to people.
I think every time you make some sort of an announcement about something, it brings up anxiety for people who loop or something like that. Like they think, is this going to be the time I wake up and it just doesn't work anymore? So it's nice to hear. Accuracy stuff. First 24 hours, same, better, different than G6?
Yeah, it's a little better. It's still The first day is while good, the days after that are even better, and particularly with G7, with the 8.2% MARD in the ICGM study. That's most accurate ICGM data ever produced. So we are very excited about that, and so G7 is it's based in the technology that we've been working with G6 and other generations, but we made quite a few enhancements both to the sensor probe and as well as the glucose algorithm.
That MARD number, is that just for arm wear, or is that anywhere that it's okay to wear?
It's arm wear, so it's 8.2% in adults, 8.1% arm wear in peds, and then with peds we also have the upper buttock location indicated. Mm-hmm.
Okay, how about somebody's asking me about accuracy at higher numbers when people are fighting with high blood sugars? Do you see any improvement there? I guess I should just ask you how you see this as an improvement over G6, really.
Yeah, it's what it really is it's all about even more consistent sensors, right? When you look at a population of sensors in a clinical study, it's not like every single one has an MARD of 8. You've got some with MARDs of 4, and some of the in a particular individual, a particular sensor, going to be a little bit higher than that. So what we're seeing with G7 is there's less outliers. It's a tighter distribution of performance, and so that's one of the things that really helps drive down overall system performance, because the MRD number you see it's a average across an entire clinical study.
So if I said to you, just do a clinical study of day 3 to day 8, you'd see a better number than me making you put in the entire 10-day wear.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. That's how people game CGM systems, right? You do a clinical study and don't do any data on day 1, or you don't do any hypoglycemia data. I mean, there's all kinds of ways to game clinical studies. The ICGM criteria that the FDA set basically specifies exactly how you're supposed to run your clinical study, which is why it's a rigorous standard.
My buddy's a good guy if you don't think about the fact that he takes our wallets when we're together. Yeah. Got to look at the whole picture. All right. Out-of-pocket costs, is it going to be similar to G6? So this episode doesn't have any ads on it because it came up rather quickly. The Dexcom G7 announcement was yesterday, came out of nowhere. I wanted to get this episode with Jake up for you right now. And I've already done all the ads I need to do this week, so I don't have any left. But I do want to just take a second to acknowledge that I'm able to make this podcast and on a Friday afternoon surprise record an episode with Jake Leach from Dexcom and get it right online for you, because this podcast is my job. And it can be my job because of the sponsors. They keep the whole thing going. They keep the lights on. They help me pay my bills. And I want to give them a second because this is the end of the year and we have a lot of great sponsors. And I want to take a moment to thank them for their sponsorship in 2022 and to thank the ones who are staying with me for 2023. And they are Omnipod, makers of the Omnipod tubeless insulin pump and that Omnipod 5 automated system. You can learn more about it at omnipod.com/juicebox. Of course, Dexcom is a sponsor. Dexcom.com/juicebox. Another sponsor of the show is the Contour Next One blood glucose meter. My daughter's been carrying this meter forever. It's absolutely terrific, incredibly accurate, and you can learn more about it at contournext.com/juicebox. If you want to use the glucagon that my daughter carries, you can get Gvoke at gvokeglucagon.com/juicebox. Check out that Gvoke Hypo Pen. US Med is where we get our diabetes supplies. usmed.com/juicebox or call 888-721-1514. They carry all the latest supplies, so check them out. And last but not least, Touched by Type 1 is a beautiful organization supporting the dreams of people with type 1 diabetes at touchedbytype1.org. I'd also like to take a moment to thank InPen from Medtronic Diabetes for their support in 2022. They won't be back in 2023, but that's okay. They were a great, great supporter of the show in 2022, and one of the reasons why you were able to get the show so plentifully and for free. Now, while I'm thanking people, I have a new sponsor in 2023, Athletic Greens. If you're looking for that AG1 from Athletic Greens, a green drink that actually tastes good, athleticgreens.com/juicebox. There are links in the show notes of the podcast players you're listening in right now, and links at juiceboxpodcast.com to all of the sponsors. And they're not a sponsor, but if you go to the T1D Exchange at t1dexchange.org/juicebox, join their registry and fill out their survey, you'll be supporting people with type 1 diabetes and helping to move diabetes research forward. You also end up supporting the show by completing the survey. So they're not quite a sponsor, but you are supporting the show when you complete the survey. I want to say again that this podcast it's a full-time job. It is a ton of work. And without ad support, this would not be my job. And today you would not be hearing this information. And I'm very grateful for the people who support the show and for the people who support the sponsors. If you have the need and I have the advertiser, I hope you use my link because it's actually a huge help. Let's get back to Jake. Out-of-pocket cost, is it going to be similar to G6?
Yeah. So, basically out-of-pocket cost coverage. It's a really good question, Scott. So, we anticipate a G6 and G7 will be very similar. In the beginning, though, when you launch a new product, coverage there will be some coverage, and then it continues to build over time. And so the second we've got approval, we can now start kind of finalizing all of those agreements with payers, Medicare, everybody else. And so what we do intend, though, even at time of launch, to have some very accessible cash pay options for people whose coverage hasn't quite kicked in. Mm-hmm. They could stay on G6 for until they have their G7 coverage, or they can switch right over, and we'll have some, like I said, very accessible cash pay pricing for them.
Can people still soak their sensors with G7?
Define soak.
They want to put them on and wear them for a few hours before they start them.
Yeah. You can do well. Actually, I want to be real precise there. You can insert a G7 sensor. What happens is, though, the second you insert it, it starts the sensor session. So all of that information is being recorded on the display device, on the G7 itself. And so it has the 30-minute warm-up time. As soon as 30 minutes goes by after insertion, it's going to start calculating and saving data. When you pair it to it, it'll be up and running.
But if I'm wearing one now and yep. I say this one's, I don't know, it's done in 6 hours, I want to put this one on now and let it soak. But as soon as I do that, do I lose the first one I'm wearing, or I can just decide to just watch the first one while I'm just losing the life of the second one during that?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Okay.
You just none of the devices, whether it's an insulin pump or receiver or phone, they don't talk to two CGM G7s at the same time. You have to switch over when you're ready to the other one. It's more around the unique feature around G7 is the auto start. The second you deploy, it starts session, which is great because I've talked to customers who would insert sensors and then forget to start their session and then realize, oh, now I started, I have to wait 2 hours before I have data. So the G7 is much faster.
I've not pushed that button once or twice. Is this going to be a pharmacy, a DME, both, just one?
Both. Yeah. We have customers that get product through different channels. Vast majority get product through the pharmacy. Mm-hmm. And so we'll continue to push that, but we also support DME for Medicare and for others.
If I'm in a household where multiple people have type 1 diabetes, can I follow a G7 and a G6 on the follow app at the same time?
Yes, you can. Yeah.
Excellent. See how easy this is, Jake? I can't believe people are so kind. Like just yesterday, I was like, give me questions. I have enough questions here. We could make a training manual for everybody. So can alarms be silent for certain durations of times? That's going to be a no right now, right?
Right. It's basically the ability to silence alerts is just like G6, but we do want to bring that feature. It's on the short list of things to put into the US product. We're working close with FDA to get them comfortable with it, and then we'll get it out very quickly.
Your new readings every 5 minutes. Do you ever consider doing it I mean, every minute, or why is it every 5 minutes, I guess?
It's basically, it's kind of it's a balance of a lot of things, like almost any kind of engineering design project. There's you're balancing multiple things. The system measures glucose continuously all the time. It's not like every 5 minutes it takes a measurement. It's measuring the entire time you're wearing the sensor. It's just every 5 minutes is when the glucose reading is communicated between the wearable and the display devices. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of a balance of, battery power, as well as, the frequency of glucose change, all of those things around 5 minutes. We've contemplated doing it more frequently, but we haven't found a specific use case where it makes sense to do that and change the way the whole system works. But it is something that we've talked about in the past. But 5 minutes, we feel pretty comfortable with it. And with the extremely minimal lag time of the sensors now, it's much less of an issue than it was years ago, when it took quite a while to see the glucose change in your CGM after you made a treatment.
Right. So as time goes on, that kind of adage of like Dexcom is showing you something that happened in the past, it's becoming less and less of the past, really.
Yeah.
A piggyback to that question, on the follow app, it'll tell you basically it's been 3 minutes since the number changed. And I know for parents, like sometimes you lay in bed going, okay, 1 more minute. Let me just refresh this app one more time. Will you ever put that countdown on the user's app?
That's an interesting idea. But I don't know if our team has contemplated that, but basically, yeah. So the user knows when that thing's coming. Yeah, because when you're sitting there, you've made a treatment, and you're basically trying to see the glucose change. I understand.
Yeah, that it's during a low blood sugar when you're sort of like, do I test? Do I drink? Do I eat? Like that kind of thing. What's the Bluetooth range from the G7 to the phone? Is it the phone's range?
It's the same as G6. Yeah, it depends a lot on the environment that you're in and how the distance. Right, it's really good when it's just like line of sight. You can get well north of 10 feet, but in crowded environments, it's less than that. But it's the same as G6.
Mm-hmm. Since it's been out already in Europe, are you already working on things that you've seen? Like, are you making adjustments on what you're learning already?
Yeah, of course. So, yeah, we've got quite a few. I mean, many of the with any product, you do an initial launch and you're always improving it. You're learning things about the way it's manufactured. You learn ways about the way it performs. We haven't seen any surprises in the OUS launch in terms of product performance. And we have a number of updates that we'll be cutting in over time that'll basically be invisible to users. But in continuing to improve reliability. And just meeting all the needs of the users. So, yeah, I'd say that the most exciting thing we've learned from our OUS launch is that more than half of the customers are brand new to Dexcom, so they're not just upgrading from G6 to G7; they're actually new users coming into Dexcom family. So it really helps us, reiterate the fact that G7 is a really good platform for expanding the use of CGM.
Okay. Has there been any change on compression lows? Do you see fewer with the new design?
We haven't done a study that compares that exactly, but one of the things that I've talked to folks about that have worn G7, as well as kind of experienced myself, is the size of G7 allows you to move it around a little bit more in terms of the locations where you can wear it. And that seems to be the best way to avoid compression lows, is to find a place that, you aren't compressing as often.
Yeah.
For myself, it's I wear it up on the top of my upper arm, and that tends to help me.
Okay. So Canada, Australia this year, not 2022, but do you see them in 2023 having G7?
Yeah, very, very, very likely. Both of those are they're approval processes, right? Regulatory submissions. G7's already in New Zealand, and so hoping to bring it to Australia soon. The vast majority of the countries will switch over to G7 in 2023. Mm-hmm. And then there's a few of the longer regulatory cycles that'll take us into early 24.
So somebody asked this question, it's the internet, so I don't know. I hadn't heard this, but are you seeing any lost connection data on G7 in Europe to the point where you think of it as a problem?
No, I think it's similar to G6. It can happen. And we actually do have technologies in our pipeline that we've been working on that we implemented on G6, some of it, and we're also looking to do it on G7 to even further enhance the Bluetooth range and capabilities. But I think one of the things with a new product, anytime you experience something, it's like, oh, is it the new product that's causing that? So it's no, it's definitely not a problem, but we do, something that we are, striving to improve it always.
Yeah, I never know the difference between like something someone heard and now they're asking, and I'm pretty clued into the space, and I was like, I hadn't heard that. So, all right, well, I think it's obvious. I saved the big questions for the end, and so here they are. I know this isn't your company, but you're going to have as much insight to it right now as anybody that I have access to talk to on this day. So how soon until people who have just decided I want to use Omnipod 5, or people who are using Control IQ, like when they're all at home, like looking at their sensors, trying to decide, like, do I order a G6 one more time? Like how soon do you expect those companies? I mean, you guys must have conversations about it, right? Like when is G7 going to work with that stuff?
Yeah, we work super close with those partners to ensure that the G7 is the integration goes smoothly. So they've both Tandem Insulin and our other partners have been working on the G7 integration for quite a while because the technology has been around. And so they, when it comes to actually launching those upgrades for users, it's really they're in control of the timing there. Mm-hmm. Now that we have the FDA approval for use with AID, it's really around them doing their upgrades. I think their public comments, so Tandem, I think, has talked about middle of 23. So that's not too long after we launch. And then I think Insulet's they're a little bit farther behind that. So, but they've made, and they continually update their public comments around when they'll have that compatibility. But trust me, they're working very diligently on getting those systems upgraded.
I wouldn't imagine that they're taking their time. Jake, I have to tell you, I know we're going, your institutional knowledge of Dexcom it's incredible. Like, I just out of order. I didn't send you these questions. I'm rattling things off. I'm jumping from topic to topic, and you're like, that? Yeah, this, that. Yeah, like, it's very impressive. So please work there for at least long as I have this podcast, because this was very easy and just full of information. And I'm going to pat myself on the back for getting through that many questions in 30 minutes, because I feel like my head is spinning now. I'm like, look, I'm watching this list dwindle in front of me, and I'm like, no, don't ask that. Ask this one. Ask that one. So anyway, I congratulations from me and from everybody listening. Everybody said thank you. It's a big deal. We were all really excited yesterday, and you know what people are going to want you to do next? Go make Dexcom G8 right now, Jake. You can maybe take a couple of days off, but then we would like to
we're working on it.
Yeah, we'd like to see it as big as the head of a pin, and I'd like to be able to wear it on my watch, if you don't mind. Go ahead, get going.
Lots of innovation still to come. We're not nearly done. So appreciate the time, Scott. It's been great, and look forward to bringing G7 to the US here very soon.
You guys push this space forward in a way that just wasn't happening before Dexcom, and I've been around this a long time. I'm never going to forget, when a new meter every 3 years seemed like a big deal. So thank you very much. I hope you have a great night.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Scott.
Take care.
See you.
Bye. Well, I'd like to thank Jake for coming on the show so soon after the announcement, and of course thank all of the people who listen to the podcast for the great questions. How did I get them, you might be wondering? Well, I got them in my private Facebook group, Juicebox Podcast Type 1 Diabetes, on Facebook. It's a private group with over 32,000 people in it. People who live with Type 1 diabetes, Type 2, they're parents of people with Type 1, they have Type 1 themselves. The gamut is run in there. You don't even have to say anything to learn in that group. It's amazing. Juicebox Podcast Type 1 Diabetes. Thank you all for the great questions. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope you check out some others. Tell a friend, share this episode with people. There's a share button in your podcast app, or you can, if you're listening online, send somebody the link. When you share the show, you're helping it to grow. And the truth is, that's the crazy best part of this whole thing. It's you guys and how supportive you are. Thank you so much for listening. I'll be back very soon with another episode of the Juicebox Podcast.